Boom.
What could you do with an extra $120? How about an extra $240 a year? To families that don't have a lot of income, these numbers can they signify a wealth of opportunities that they can do rather than put towards mandatory school uniforms. My purpose today is to persuade you to support a dress code in our public schools instead of mandatory uniforms. As a parent of 3 boys in our house, I know how expensive it can get to buy clothes for our 3 boys, and alone 1 child. After doing some research and looking at some price comparisons, we are not the only people faced with these decisions. Voting for or against public school uniforms is a big decision that will impact our kids' lives for a very long time. There are many options for us that are more conducive as parents than mandatory school uniforms. I will begin by sharing how mandatory school uniforms are causing financial difficulties for many families, the reasons why, and conclude with how a dress code in public schools is more beneficiary to people. With our topics in mind, let's begin with what mandatory uniforms are doing to families financially. Mandatory uniforms in public schools are causing financial difficulties for many families and cities. For example, an insightful article that was written by Adam Clark from Pennsylvania in 2013 was titled, "Thousands Say They Can't Afford Uniforms." The article states that 2,500 parents asked for a $50 voucher to help with the cost of mandatory uniforms. Out of 2,500 parents, only 60 of the parents qualified for this help. The article shows that how the city was trying to compensate to pay for these mandatory uniforms by giving them a $50 voucher, but due to the lack of funding, only 60 of them actually qualified for it. So that left 2,440 families with no assistance. Lastly, mandatory uniforms are more expensive for families that are used to going to thrift stores and buying clothes. It is a lot harder to find the exact size and color of certain clothes to fit a uniform versus a dress code. Now that we have seen how mandatory uniforms in public schools are causing financial difficulties, let's look at the reasons why. Mandatory uniforms in public schools require the need for an additional set of clothing, which causes the financial hardship for many families. In the first place, Michael Sostrom was published by USA Today in 2013 saying, "All the uniform requirement really does is cause parents to buy 2 sets of clothing, an added financial burden many parents don't need and can't afford." Meanwhile, a regular set of clothes equivalent to the uniform is about $160 for girls and about $183 for boys. They consist of 5 pairs of pants, skirts or jumpers, 5 long sleeve shirts, 5 short sleeve shirts, 1 sweater, 5 pairs of socks, and 1 pair of shoes. Now, I don't know about your kids, but 1 pair of shoes for our boys doesn't last the whole school year. And according to the costhelper.com, the school uniforms on average cost $283 for girls and $315 for the boys. Now that we know why this means that mandatory uniforms force the average family to pay over $250 more per kid to have the uniform standard versus the dress code. So now that you know why mandatory uniforms in public schools are causing financial hardships, let's look at a great alternative. So, our solution. My solution is to choose a dress code that offers 2 more benefits over mandatory uniforms. The first benefit is ease of shopping. People that are used to shopping at thrift stores can have an easier time to conform to a dress code rather than mandatory uniforms. The second benefit is the cost savings. Using my figures from earlier, families would save an average of $120 on a girl and about $133 on a boy for a school year. In conclusion, dress codes in our public schools save us money. So let's review what we've learned today. First, we learned that mandatory uniforms in our public schools cause financial hardships for a lot of families. For starters, very few families that applied for financial aid received any. Next, we learned mandatory uniforms in public schools require you to have 2 sets of clothing. In essence, that meant that the mandatory uniforms force the average family to budget over $250 extra for these mandatory uniforms. And lastly, I mentioned the solution, which is to choose the dress code, which has 2 benefits over mandatory uniforms. The first benefit was the ease of shopping, and the second benefit was the cost of savings. When making your decision today, think about all the families that will be financially difficult because of choosing mandatory uniforms versus the dress code. We can have the same standards at our public school with the dress code, but at half the cost. So, what will you do with the extra $120 this year?